Welcome to the Standing Up to POTS podcast, otherwise known as the POTScast. This podcast is dedicated to educating and empowering the community about postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, commonly referred to as POTS. This invisible illness impacts millions, and we are committed to explaining the basics, raising awareness, exploring the research, and empowering patients to not only survive but thrive. This is the Standing Up to POTS podcast.
Hello, fellow POTS patients and nice people who care about POTS patients. I'm Jill Brook, and today we have an episode of the POTS Diaries, where we get to know someone in the POTS community and hear their story. So today we are speaking with Mike, who kindly volunteered to share his experiences. I've never met him, so I'm as excited as you are to hear his story. I know he's super nice and super patient, but Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you, Jill. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with some basics about you. What's your age and where are you?
I am 46 and I live in Scottsdale, Arizona. You can imagine temps are hot, especially around now. The AC's cool inside, so if someone POTS, it's very doable and livable as long as you stay indoors.
Yes, I have some memories of visiting Scottsdale because of the Mayo Clinic and thinking that just making it from the parking lot into the inside with air conditioning was quite a trial. So hats off living there. Where did you grow up and what were you like as a kid?
Growing up, it was a little bit here, there, everywhere. Military family, so we're moving about every 5 years. Born in Columbus, Ohio, but was only there till 5, and then moved to West Virginia, down in the holler, where the mountains are your backyard. California to 29 Palms, couldn't be more different. A year in Nevada, and then ultimately to Arizona.
So all over.
And in terms of what I was like as a kid, growing up in those areas, it was, I won't sugarcoat it, a bit of a punk, oldest of 4. And, had to maintain my status as the king, if you will, especially growing up in West Virginia, where it's a hyper-masculine culture, Hatfield and McCoy's type of stuff. My nickname, was Macho Mike. California, thankfully, when we moved there, got involved in junior RTC, 7th, 8th, and 9th grades. So they added some structure to my punkedness and much more thoughtful and thorough in terms of my actions. And so it was a good thing.
How would your friends or family describe your personality?
It just depends on the day, depends on what I've done or what I haven't done, depends on which one you ask. My sister was kind-hearted soul, nothing bad to say about anybody. She'd never say a bad word about me, even though, we fist fought as kids. And so, hats off to her. My brothers, they would still say I'm a punk, still say they're better than me, but they know the truth. My wife, it depends on whether I have or haven't taken out the trash or, helped out with dinner, something like that. They'll determine what she has to say. My boys, they love me to death, but Daddy's very stern and he has high expectations and depends on whether they're in trouble. Most of the time, they're absolutely, happy to see me.
So if you had some years without POTS or any related health issues, how many of those years did you have? Like, did POTS start showing itself early in your life or late in life?
Probably like lots of POTS patients, I've gone back in time and reassessed what's happened in my life and looked at it through a POTS lens to try and understand, was this POTS or was this just something else? And ultimately, I've either had this for about 4 years or 30. And so when I was 16, I was running track and I was running the 400. And, I was that kid who ran and played basketball and football for 6 hours a day after school and didn't do his homework. Ultimately, I had endless energy. But for some reason, this 400, I could only get about halfway through it. I knew my heart rate was pegged. I felt really fatigued and sick. And my coach comes up to me. He's like, all right, what's going on, Somar? You got mono? I didn't know they called that the kissing disease back then. He's trying to make a joke of it. But ultimately, my heart rate stayed up and went to various doctors and, saw some sort of specialist in either Vegas or Phoenix. My mom was a nurse, so, she paid attention to stuff. She told me he did blood pressure readings in my arms, my legs, echoes, all this kind of stuff. I just remember the guy said, he'll grow out of it. And so off and on, I've had some symptoms that I could probably attribute to POTS or at least the precursors to it. But it really wasn't until 4 years ago that, everything hit me hard. But before that point in time, when I was 16, I lived life, like I said, basketball, football. I was out playing all the time, endless energy. I could eat what I want, do whatever I want. I was invincible. practical joker, like I said, fighting with the family, fighting with friends, going out and having fun, riding dirt bikes. Absolutely no fear. Had, really good time as a kid.
So what about this time between age 16 and 4 years ago? Was POTS much of an issue during that time, or POTS symptoms or premonitions of POTS? Or did you grow out of it for a while?
I would have fluctuations, if you will. So I would wake up in the middle of the night gasping, and that would come and go for years. And I would have weight gain that really didn't make a whole lot of sense. Also, I would say if I exercised a lot overnight, I would be sweating. I'd be sweating and wake up drenched in sweat. Heart rate would be around 85 or so to 90, just sitting and doing nothing. And this would be just my regular day. And so it wasn't quite tachycardia, right? It wasn't 100, but it was just right underneath it all the time. And so I just thought I was a rabbit instead of a tortoise. I thought I was, move fast, live fast, die young. That's the way my body was wired. That's what I thought. Versus, these folks where they exercise all the time and their heart rate's, 40 and it's extremely efficient and they're going to live to 100, But ultimately I'd have these symptoms that come and go. Looking back on it now, I at least had the precursors to it in terms of, if you think of fire, what do you need for fire? You need oxygen, a fuel source, and heat. And if you have those three things in combination, you can get yourself a fire. You don't have one of them, you're not going to get it. And so ultimately 4 years ago, my boss and I got something and it tipped us both into POTS.
Really?
Yep.
Can you talk more about that?
Sure. My boss, we've been working together in the same office for probably going on 3 years. And everything was fine. We were living life normal. We had kids, had stressors, all that kind of stuff, but, all the usual business professionals. And so, there's stress around that in terms of deadlines and projects and such. But at our annual meeting, he had some issues, where he had to leave the meeting and go to the ER. And I'd heard about this. He wasn't actually my boss at the time. I'd actually taken another job right before that. He had to go to the ER and stuff. And, so everyone, was kind of, gossiping about that and wondering what's going on with him. And then I had ended up in the ER. And so he was talking to me and, we were just talking to each other like, hey, how you doing? That sort of thing. I heard you were, in the ER. I was like, I heard you were in the ER. And we started comparing notes. And in comparing notes, it's like, wait a minute, about 90% of what you're saying is exactly what I'm saying or have experienced. So what the heck is going on? And, when I was in an ER and got cardioverted, I had a doctor I was talking to about this. She said, hey, Mike, from what you're telling me, you should look into dysautonomia. And that kind of stuck with me a little bit. I didn't go digging in too deep at that time. And he told me he went to the Mayo and got diagnosed with POTS. And when I looked up POTS after he told me and see that it's subgroup of dysautonomia, I'm like, wait a minute, this is no accident here. And this preceded COVID stuff. So in my brain, it's like, okay, what the heck have we been exposed to? And why him and why me? And ultimately, I went to the Mayo and talked to Goodman and, had them do the workup with the tilt table test, all that kind of stuff. And they're like, yeah, Mike, you're orthostatic intolerant. And ultimately, based on my symptomology, it's likely POTS.
And so did you ever get answers about what the trigger was? Was it a virus? What was it?
We always want the answer, right? We want to know what was the genesis, but it just never seems to come. I was looking at it being ignorant of the medical profession because I've never gone to the doctor. Growing up in West Virginia, you rub dirt on it, you limp along, you play with twisted and broken ankles. You don't whine about pain and suffering. And you certainly don't go see the doctor. They're just taking your money for nothing. So that's how I grew up. And to that point, I'd never gone to see a doctor other than when I was 16 that one time. Well, I should say that one period, of seeing docs to get the he'll grow out of it answer. And so it was very interesting. I thought they should just be able to take his blood, my blood, do some sort of comparison analysis and say, okay, yeah, you both got this virus or that, were exposed to some sort of mold contaminant in your work environment or whatever, but never were able to get those answers. Ultimately, we just assumed we caught the office cold, but it was some virus that, again, if you've got the right ingredients available, tips you into that POTS state. Because he was dizzy, I was dizzy, vertigo. I mean, the heart racing for no reason, all that good stuff.
So if I were to force you to be out of character for a second and to be a complainer, give us 30 seconds of complaints. What are your worst symptoms? What does POTS do to you?
At my worst or right now? Because at my worst, there's a laundry list. And I'm an analyst by trade. Data and analytics, that's my thing. So, of course, I started collecting the data relative to myself. I don't care about the whole wisdom of crowds, medical methodology that they try to, figure out what's wrong with you. I care about me, my symptoms, how my body reacts. And so I started taking my stats, charting it, and basically using technology to see if I could, help solve my problems. And for the most part, I've been able to do that. But when this initially started happening, I had my big toe on my left foot was numb. Just very weird and odd to me. But when they started asking questions and, I'm telling them these little things, they're like, oh, well, that could be significant. That could be like small fibroneuropathy or something to do with diabetes, all these other things. But, I was having my heart racing. I was having waking up freaked out episodes, which were different from the gasping episodes. So waking up gasping was just kind of like sleep apnea. I was choking. Waking up freaked out is completely different. It's almost like you woke up from a nightmare, but there wasn't a nightmare. And my wife, she hated him because, of course, she's dead asleep next to me. And all of a sudden, I'm freaking, she's like wondering what the heck's going on, coming out from a deep sleep herself. But as with anything, you can become a little bit numb to things. And so over time, it didn't scare her as bad. But gastric symptoms where, I would just kind of puke, burping all the time, having pressure in my chest. The muscles in my back would always be tight. And even when, I'd be on vacation or something where I'm not, looking at the phone all the time, I'd still have this. And so I would be driving and I wouldn't be able to keep my hand up. Like one of my hands, it'd start to drop. And I'd try to figure out, all right, am I losing blood in the thing or am I losing feeling? And I couldn't figure out which. It just became extremely heavy. I got to the point where I was a little bit afraid to drive to work in the morning sometimes because I was having what I guess I call displacement. It wasn't dizziness. I understand dizziness, and that's where everything's a little bit wobbly. This was looking ahead, and I looked to my right, and in between looking to my right when I was looking ahead, I kind of lose track of that. So it's almost like a blind spot. I got a gap in my brain of what happened between here and here. And just all these, oddball symptoms. And as I listed them out, I'm looking at them like, I'm a hypochondriac. This isn't real. This isn't me. This isn't what's really going on. I'm over analyzing, over exaggerating what's happening to me. That's how I'd rationalize it. At least I was smart enough to list it all and to see, okay, what reoccurs? What are one-offs and what are, frequent occurrences? And start to realize, quite a bit of these, happen all the time. I'm just not really paying attention to it until I write it down and see, out of the past month, this has happened 12 times. Versus when I wasn't writing it down, I would feel like, happened maybe once or twice. So writing it down really helped me understand, what is true symptom and what was just some sort of one-off.
Right. I think you bring up an interesting point, which is that for as much as a lot of POTS patients hate being gaslighted by others, some of us gaslight ourselves. And, and by questioning, because I've done it too. Yeah, you look at the list of symptoms and you think, I must be nuts.
I had a provider sit down and talk to me about that.
Oh, share. Yeah. I
went to an endocrinologist, one of the top docs here in Arizona. And I said, I'm not feeling well. Here's the symptoms. Here's what's going on. And, I need you to do a workup, because I do have hypothyroidism. And so I'm thinking it has to be due to that because, of course, your thyroid regulates all kinds of systems. And so if it's out of whack, that can explain these crazy symptoms all over the body. And he ran the labs and, sat me down and said, Mike, labs are good. Everything's good. I think you need to stop focusing on your symptoms. And he basically was calling me a hypochondriac without calling me a hypochondriac. And at the point in time he's saying it, I was still in the process. And I'm like, hey, I admit, this is a lot, but I intuitively know something's wrong. Something's wrong. I don't like you people necessarily. I don't come visit you people. And so, I'm here because something is wrong. And ultimately, a week after I saw him, I ended up in the ER and got cardioverted. I was just on a car ride going down to Tucson to see the Book of Mormon, stay at a resort. My wife and I were going to enjoy my birthday. So it's like, what is going on? It's absolute madness.
Wow. I think sometimes some of us who are young females, when we encounter that, have to be reminded that it's not just young females who get that. Our listeners can't see you right now, but you're, a big athletic guy who we wouldn't think is the stereotype to get that treatment from a doctor.
Right.
But that's not the first time I've heard it.
From what I've seen, there is more bias towards women to treat them in a way like, this is just anxiety. You're working yourself up, basically calling it your fault. And it's just because guys growing up, we're probably taught to be a little more assertive. But again, even then, being assertive doesn't necessarily, get your doc, giving you the top shelf kind of treatment. They still, think it's just anxiety. You're working yourself up. You're a hypochondriac. Ultimately, I would just say, you as a patient, you've got to push. This is your money. You're paying for this. Get your money's worth. Make the doc say, all right, I see this or I don't see this. I know this. I don't know that. Get them to put it in writing. Because when they commit to put it in writing, then it's real. Versus, just what they say to you. Because I've had plenty of doctors say, try this, Mike, try that, Mark. We even write it down on a little note, and then I go try it. And ultimately, when you go in for your next appointment, like, well, what medications are you on? And you list the medications. Well, they'll list the medications for you they have in the system, and it's not what you were handed on that little side note. And it's like, well, wait a minute, the doctor told me to do this. Why isn't that in there? And it's just the doctors kind of playing the game to try things, but, not ultimately commit to them.
That's great advice. So you had mentioned that your symptoms are better now. Can you talk more about how you got them better?
Sure. I would have to say it came down to the fact that when this first hit me, I thought I was going to die. I really did. I thought I was checking out. I had devices that were measuring my heart rate and palpitations, things of that nature. And I was having just an obscene amount of palpitations throughout the day. And, it's not like the device was off. I was feeling it. I feel these things coming all the time. Sleep deprived and not knowing what's going on and kind of losing hope because I'm talking to these doctors and not getting anywhere. And so I got to the point where I just thought I am going to die. So I need to do the right things for my family. So, I started writing down, all the passwords and sites for the insurance and financial sites and things like that for my wife, basically making sure they're all set up because I wasn't sure I was going to wake up in the morning. That's a tough place to be, especially when you come from feeling invincible to absolutely hopeless. And it wasn't like I wasn't trying to fight, but I had nothing else in my toolbox to figure out how to fight. I tried everything I knew, but, I was largely ignorant of what really was going on. Ultimately didn't die. I wouldn't be here talking to you, but I started on the POTS regimen and reading up on it and learning what I wasn't being told. And as a male, you get the same advice as pretty much a female in terms of that POTS regimen. But I'm 6'3", $185, and Janie, who's 5'3", and $110 maybe, is probably getting the same advice in terms of the amount of water and salt and all that kind of stuff. I started, experimenting and upping it and realizing, okay, when I do drink more water and you get the salt, then, I do better. The palpitations do go down. And then I focused on my sleep. I grew up as a mechanic as a kid, turning a wrench. And I just know that a vehicle in disrepair, it kind of snowballs. And so, more things break down and you get worse, major repairs as a result. And so I know the human body intuitively repairs at night when you're sleeping. I wasn't sleeping well. So I started focusing on that. I bought a camera on Amazon for $60, it does the night vision and a memory card, and I recorded my sleep. And, then I got a little, wrist pulse oximeter that shows movement in an app called SnoreLab, which would record my snoring and any events that happen, like me waking up freaked out and gasping for air and all that kind of stuff. And I started using the movement data and the timestamps from the SnoreLab to be able to then look at the camera and see what was going on. Was it just my body doing this? Was I in some kind of odd position? What's happening to me at night that's impacting my sleep? And ultimately I'd find, well, the dog moves. And for some reason, when the dog would move, my body would just jerk. So I got the dog out. Then I would notice, hey, around 4:00, in the summertime, light comes into the room and I'm getting up early as a result of that. So blackout shades. My wife would move or she would make a noise and all of a sudden I would jump. So I would actually start using earplugs or a little bit of an earmuff so that I didn't hear these things. And ultimately, I focused on getting some sleep and getting restorative sleep. And noticed when I did that I started improving and getting much better, even with the salt and everything that I was doing, and the hydration and the focus on electrolytes. Once I got to the point where it's like, okay, I kind of feel like halfway human. I'm still symptomatic. The doctors are saying, all right, well, Mike, you got to exercise. So, all right, started doing that, which just made everything worse, at least initially. I would basically fail fast. And that was my modus operandi is, fail fast, fail cheap. So experiment, do it quick, learn from it and move on, but don't take too big a leap. So experiment with running is, 15 minutes, see what happens. How much water did I intake? Log all of that, how much salt, those sorts of things. And then, all right, am I good? Now let's increase it. Okay, if I increase it and I'm only on so much water and salt, I'm becoming symptomatic. Okay, so up the salt and up the water, and see, is there a correlation? Can I go longer as a result? Now let's move water and salt into actually when you exercise versus just front loading and doing it before you do. And it was just this experimentation, which has been over a couple of years, that has led me to be able to play 4 hours of basketball time if I want to. Now, for me to play those 4 hours of basketball, I've got to prepare. There's diet, there's the fluids and the electrolytes, there's making sure I'm prepared with sleep and got my stress levels down. But ultimately, I can do it. And I do because I'm a competitive guy. I'd love to play basketball, throw elbows in the paint, with my boys and not my little boys, but, the guys that kind of grew up with playing basketball, the guys at the gym and, just competing because, that makes me happy. Part of this too is finding the joys in your life and, focusing on those as well, because I feel like, that helps my autonomic nervous system. Because when I do my tests, I see that my sympathetic system is on overdrive almost always, even when I feel good. They've done all kinds of HRV work, and I've read the research. And, with POTS patients, they look, for your high frequency, to be low. And a lot of them define it as under 200. Mine's under 100, just on a normal day when I'm waking up in the morning and I'm rested and relaxed. So I got to get my parasympathetic side of my nervous system boosted up as much as I can. I do breathing work to help out with that. Again, finding the joys in life. And a lot of people say stay positive, but I think positive is relative. So I would define positive as it has a positive impact on your nervous system, so your parasympathetic is increased. Ultimately, it's figuring out what those positive activities are for me and engaging in those and not what people think, should be positive for you or society does. Ultimately, when I put it all together as a package, I can be asymptomatic if I choose.
So that was actually my question. So when you do all of these things, and it sounds like you work really hard at it, can you be completely asymptomatic and normal, or are there still parts of your life where POTS has an impact?
I would say, I'm not 100% normal. I'm 100% functional, so I can function. But, there's something going on in my head in terms of chemicals and stuff like that. After they've done research and, hey, if you overdo it in terms of exercise, you're going to be moody. You're going to have cortisol shooting up through the roof, stuff like that. And ultimately, I feel like I need to keep up with the exercise because it does keep me upright and keeps me completely functional. And so I also am trying to force an adaptation, if you will. The more exercise you do, the longer you can do it and the more your body adapts to that. And so I'm trying to see, all right, can I push this thing and push it so far that, maybe I don't have to keep up with it in terms of my regimen. But ultimately at this point I do. And so I do what I can. And I would say, to borrow from a good book that I read, written by Shannon Lee, who's Bruce Lee's daughter, it's Be Water, My Friend. I flow with it. It's basically sit with POTS and feeling it and understanding it and how it impacts my body, and then knowing what to do at any given point in time and develop those tools and tactics to be one with it, if you will. So when I first started, I was very combative. I wanted to kill this thing. I wanted to fight this thing. I absolutely want to murder it and get it done and out of me. And then, come the realization that it fights back pretty hard, almost as hard as I do. And, I couldn't do that. When you can't, win the war, what do? Well, you got to figure out a way to make peace. And so, just making peace with it and knowing that it's always going to be there, but trying to understand it, sit with it, metaphorically talk with it to understand as best you can, kind of like a best friend, like you would, and use that to function as highly as possible with it.
Yeah. And you had mentioned that when you were young, that you were quite macho and into the masculine culture.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm guessing, does POTS force you to say, okay, I gotta have more finesse than force?
Oh, yeah. It humbles you like no other opponent you've ever gone up against. And it's because you can't punch it. You can't beat on it. The harder you try to do something like that, where you try to exert your will on it, the worse off you are. Again, coming from this hyper-masculine culture, I thought yoga was for girls. And that's the way I was brought up. And you know what? No, it's not. It actually is awesome. It is something that, in meditation too, helps you center yourself, calm yourself, get that sympathetic nervous system, that drive lowered, and get your body into that parasympathetic rest and digest mode. And so you have to change your tactics. You've got to evolve with POTS. You're going to be miserable. And so, yeah, hitting my head against the wall many, many, many times early on, finally wised up and smartened up and realized, I've got to evolve with this. It's like the unofficial model for the Marine Corps is adapt, overcome, and something to the extent of, you've got to be able to what's called read and react. You got to read the situation, react to it, learn from it, and then evolve.
So have you learned anything else from POTS?
Definitely a ton of medical jargon and far more than I ever wanted to, from doing the research and trying to understand what the heck the doctors are telling me or not telling me, and, trying to figure out, what I can try to better recover. What tools can I have in my toolbox? You can't always use a hammer. Sometimes you need to have some specialized tools for specialized situations that'll make your life, more improved and more efficient and effective at knocking out the symptom, if you will, before it becomes a problem. I've learned to better prepare for exercise, and I would say keep up in my later years. My boys are 5 and 6. I want to be playing basketball them when they're 15, 16. I got to keep up, and that's probably one thing I wasn't doing when I get hit with this 4 years ago. When I talk about having the ingredients to enable POTS, I was an analyst. I was sitting at a desk. I was working 10-hour days. I would be sitting for 6 to 8 hours straight, just laser focused on that screen. Stress is high, always putting out fires, eating the wrong things, not exercising, and really abusing my body in the way that I did when I was younger. But, when you're 44, 42, those ages, you can't do that anymore. Again, you got to adapt. You can't look at the past and say, oh, I want to be 20 again. It's not the way life works. You don't get that. No one gets that. So again, you've got to come to realization of where you are and what you are today and adapt to the situation. For me, I've learned how to live better, and probably ultimately will extend my life, unless there's like some one-off event because of this, because I am eating the right things. I eat what food eats, in terms of I eat a lot of salads now. Before it was meat and potatoes. And my electrolytes, I never focused on those. I calculated once, I probably got a quarter of the recommended daily allowance of potassium on a daily basis. Now I'm getting the full load. And why? Because it's good for the heart. Allows my heart to be strong when I have these palpitation episodes, to just motor through them, built up some slack. Same thing with focusing on magnesium and the sodium, understanding the sodium glucose pump, and the fact that you want to optimize getting the sodium into your bloodstream to enhance your blood volume. You got to have sugar with it. So, all right, do you add sugar, like a spoonful of it, or are we talking you eat it with your fruits and other things that are natural sugars? So I've learned how to do things like that, and the timing of it. It's been a lot of work, and most people don't want to do this work. But ultimately, my goal again is to be playing with my kids, at 15 and 16, and playing basketball, keeping up with them. And the competitor in me says, not just keeping up, but dominating. Don't want to show them weakness, especially at that age, because they'll take advantage of it. I should know.
So you sound like somebody who probably has long had a lot of good discipline, but it sounds like this has maybe even strengthened your discipline to do the work. And it sounds like it's paid off for you. Is that right?
Yeah. I realized what I could lose. I could lose my family. Early on, This hit me hard. I was telling my wife, from not feeling like I'm going to wake up in the morning and die to, hey, I don't even know if I can work with this. I'm going into conference rooms and lying down on the floor while my heart's thumping, with my legs up on the wall, and hoping no one comes in and sees me like this. But I am in absolute survival mode at that point, and don't care, even if they do. Even sometimes just lying down on my desk and doing something like that. It feels like absolute craziness now. And my wife and I, early on, talking through the struggles, she's crying and she's saying stuff like, I don't know who you are. We used to be so good together. And it was true. It was honest. And I'm crying about this now, and that happened years ago, but this can take a lot from you. And so if you don't do the work, if you just take it for granted that you're going to get better, if you just hope the doctors are going to do the work for you, it's not going to happen. So you've got to take responsibility for it. That's the way I looked at it. This is my life. If I die, the doctors won't even know it. It's not like they get a death certificate that says, oh, your patient off. Sorry. It impacts me, impacts my family. So I took responsibility. I became responsible for my care and figuring it out and going through those struggles, and also being better at communicating with my wife and my kids about, hey, daddy doesn't feel good right now. And here's what's going on. Here's why. I've seen people where they take the route of fake it till you make it. Don't say anything's wrong. People will hear that. They're just thinking you're whining and complaining, and they're going to look down on you. Well, yeah, coming from where I come from, that's exactly where my head was at. But I realized that communication helps, even if you don't hear what you want to hear. Even if you don't hear, oh, babe, that's okay. I'll go do this for you, or, I'll help out, I think just being honest helps us in terms of her knowing exactly where I'm at and what's going on, and being more accepting of it, when I'm not in a good spot. But like I said, I feel like you got to do the work. And if you do the work, you can get out of this tailspin most of you are in, especially when you're starting. When you do that, it can get better, and does. And you can get on top of it and keep on top of it. And another thing that drove me too was I felt like the more I let it go on when I was in my bad spot, the more damage, like I said, coming from that car mechanic mentality, that could occur. And so I treated it like a sprint in the beginning, where going to many, many doctors, trying to figure out what's going on and educate myself and go at it hard. But then once I had enough information, it was, all right, now I realize I've got this for life. It's a marathon. And so how am I going to prepare, and how am I going to continue on this marathon? And you can't just, jump into a marathon and do it. You're going to hurt yourself. I feel like, that has been extremely beneficial, especially these last couple of years.
So it sounds like you've done an amazing job of juggling a lot of things: the physical stuff, the work-related stuff, the relationship-related stuff. And it sounds like that takes a whole lot of bandwidth to do that. And now I think my impression of you, and I imagine as our listeners are hearing you, they are hearing somebody who conquered this thing, who kicked butt, who rallied and overcame. And when you mentioned just briefly that you did have times where you were laying on the floor of your conference room with your feet up against a wall and things like that, I almost feel myself being surprised, like, oh, this guy did have those rough times. Is there any advice or message you would have for somebody who's laying on their floor right now with their feet up, feeling stuck, that, and or what gave you the strength to power through when everything seemed pretty bleak? What were you thinking about?
To start with your second question, for me, it was easy. It was my boys. My dad died when I was 5. I got hit with this, right around the time, that they were starting to get to that age. And, you start to think about those things. You start to think about what it was like not going out with a father, and what it would be like for your kids. And the competitor in me, hypermasculine culture, I think helped me out greatly from that standpoint, because I said, well, I'm going to kill myself trying. I'm going to put the fear aside, and I was completely fearful. And I'm going to put that aside, and I'm going to do the work, regardless of how I think it's going to hurt me. Again, to borrow from the book, Be Like Water, My Friend, she talks about skillful frustrations. That's how people grow. And so I approached it and I said, I want to learn about this symptom and I want to see if I do X if it impacts it or Y and if it impacts it. And I just went through and educated myself and experimented and tried and failed fabulously many, 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 many times. But there were times where I would reach an insight that, okay, if I do X, I improve. So, all right, I want to do that again. Does it work still? Yes. Okay, great. How much improvement can I get, with this? Using more, using less, and just putting in that work and that effort with those skillful frustrations. It is absolutely frustrating, going to the doctors and paying money and not getting advice that is tactically sound. Again, growth in the military. I want to know, what do I need to do to improve myself? I don't want hypotheses. I don't want what works for people on average. I want to know for me, what helps me? That's what I need to do. And then I need to know what those things are and keep them in my toolbox. And I know when you need to know when to use them. So skillful frustrations. To answer the first part of your question, if you're lying down in the conference room, legs up, your heart's pounding, you're dizzy, you're just wondering what's going on, where did my life, what I do in my life to take this wrong turn. Ultimately, I would say you got to get over the fear. It's the fear of what hasn't happened yet, the fear that it is going to kill you. And I say you got to figure out how to get over the fear and start listening and understanding what your body's really telling you. I didn't know what high blood pressure felt like or low blood pressure, but I took a blood pressure cuff, and when I felt ill, I started taking readings and see, okay, it's high right now. Oh, so that's what high blood pressure possibly feels like. And then again, when I feel that same thing, take it again. Oh, yep, it's high. This is what high blood pressure feels like. So when the doctor's saying high blood pressure, that's what he's talking about. Okay, now we can have a real informed conversation about this. Same thing with heart rate. Heart rate's high, heart rate's low. Well, what exactly does that feel like? What does 90 feel like relative to 180, relative to 240? You don't know unless you measure it. And so, with that business background I have, it's measure and it's monitor. And then you can manage. And it's helped me with my doctors. I've got a lot of tech tools, if you will, the LiveCore Cardia. That thing is a godsend because I can look at the EKGs and I've learned how to read them and understand, I'm having PACs versus having PVCs or skipped beats. And so then when I go to my doctor and I talk to him, it's like, hey, doc, I was having skipped beats. How do you know that? Well, here's the reading. And it's a device that's FDA certified, and so they trust it. Versus like, say, an Apple Watch where it doesn't have the sensitivity to really take, those types of readings. At one point, I had atrial flutter. I diagnosed it before the Mayo did. I went into them saying, hey, guys, I got atrial flutter. And so, of course, then they run their 15-second EKG and they see and they're like calling up the doctor, like, oh, hey, your patient's got atrial flutter. What do we need to do? The nurse, doesn't realize I've already talked to the doctor and told him what's going on. And he's kind of told me, okay, well, if it is this, do this. He's already giving me instructions. She's kind of freaking out like, oh, what do we need to do next here? Just getting yourself involved in the tools that can help you understand and manage your condition, I would say it's going to help you out greatly outside of just getting over that fear. And the last piece is, like I talked about before, you got to sit down, you got to listen. You're not going to kill POTS. You can't fight it out of you. If you're passive, it's still not going to go away. You can't be an ostrich with your head in the sand. It's going to be there when you pull it out. Sit down, talk to it, listen to it. Listen to it without judgment. Don't assume you're dying. Don't assume it's going to kill you, that sort of stuff. Listen and feel and try and understand what's going on. Try to figure out a way with the technology of explaining that to your doctor. Blood pressure, heart rate, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So I feel like you're an awesome example of taking control, even if that means do a ton of trial and error with all the painful error that inevitably happens in trial and error. Work for it. And if you have to take 2 steps back for every 3 steps forward, that's all part of the process, and just don't let it get you down. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. If it gets you down, I would say that's okay. You definitely are going to have your bad days and you're going to have your good days. And if you're documenting the good days, that's actually beneficial for you. Don't take those for granted because you can learn from those good days. you're documenting, what you're having to eat, your intake in terms of, fluids and stuff like that, and your medicines, and things that you're feeling throughout the day. Keep tabs on a spreadsheet. When you have your good day, you can see what led up to that. And then you can use that information to say, okay, well, here's what I've done that leads up to a good day. Can I replicate that success? And if you can, great. Again, now you've got a tool. Don't take those good days for granted, and don't beat yourself up for the bad days, because they're going to come and they're going to be plentiful, and you've got to be able to just roll with it and realize that even though you're taking those 2 steps back, right, one step forward, you're going to be able to start to climb. And it may be you're just taking inches a day, but do it. Take those inches, and you got to start somewhere. You may want to take the miles from the get-go. You may feel like you're entitled to the miles. I felt like I was entitled to it, that I should have been able to get better fast because I had access to, I've got money, I've got good health care, I've got, top docs. I felt entitled to getting within months. And come to find out, nope, doesn't matter. None of that matters. Ultimately, I had to be the one who kind of sat down and figured it out myself, and just, learn what I could, from those folks, and experiment and see what worked, what didn't, and then keep moving forward.
That's great. And one thing that I have noticed is that, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you feel like you're at a 0, the one good thing about being at a 0 is that if you can just move from 0 to 1, that's infinite improvement, right? You never get that big of a leap again as you do when you're starting from 0. So there's a little bit of a bright side in that. Okay, so I just have 2 more questions for you. What do you wish more people knew about POTS?
I mean, in general public, they're probably widely ignorant of it. I wish, they actually knew it was a thing. There's mixed messaging out there. COVID long haulers, they're starting to hear about that because the media is trying to make people more afraid about, not having their COVID vaccines. But I guess I have a marketing degree, and ultimately, I don't like the word POTS. And it's just because it's called associative network in people's brains. And so POTS, potheads, lazy people, and POTS patients can be perceived as that. And I think it propagates this stereotype that when you look at a POTS patient on the outside, they're just being lazy, and it's just all in their head. And it's not. So if they could come up with a better term, I wish they would do that. But like you said, looking at me, I look fine. From what you're hearing, hey, things are good. The fact is, you can't see it. People need to know and understand that they can't see it. And if I had to equate it to something, I would say, look at your children. When you've got a kid who's sick, or they say they're sick, and you read a situation wrong. So like, Daddy, my tummy doesn't feel good. And then they go off and they play. And you're like, my tummy doesn't feel good. They're BSing me. And then 10 minutes later, they're throwing up. And you're like, whoa, how did I miss that? And it's because you can't feel what that other person is feeling. And people don't always behave in a way that you think is, in line with what it's sick is. Your perception of sick is different than theirs. And so just realize that, hey, POTS folks, they may look all right on the outside. They might have that smile. They're probably fabulous liars in terms of putting on the pretty face and, making everything look okay as much as we can. They could be really battling something, that would just scare the Jesus out of you if you had it. I think a general population, if they could understand that, figure that out, you'd probably show a lot more empathy, to this group, especially the doctors.
And my last question is, when I had asked for volunteers to speak about their POTS experience, why did you agree to let us share your story today?
I would say it's just because I have had some success, and I've been there on the deathbed, at least that's how I felt. And all the way to, again, playing 4 hours of basketball if I choose, I can do whatever I want with my kids. And I feel like if my story could help anybody, great. Selfishly, I'm doing a lot of this research, not just for myself, but for my kids. One of my boys, I don't know, I feel like he might have those ingredients that someday he could tip into this condition. And I don't like that. And so I will push myself to the limits and figure out, what works for me so that I can pass that on to him. And if others benefit along the way, great. I'm not that selfish, but ultimately, that's what's driving me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and all these great insights with us. And I'm so thrilled that you have been able to find something that helps you a lot. We really appreciate your letting us hear about it. And hey, listeners, remember, this is not medical advice. Consult your healthcare team about what's right for you, because we're all so different. But thank you for tuning in. Remember, you're not alone, and please join us again soon.
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts or on our website, www.standinguptopots.org/podcast. And I would add, if you have any ideas or topics you'd like to suggest, send them in. You can also engage with us on social media at the handle Standing Up to Pots. Thanks for listening, and we hope you join us. This show is a production of Standing Up to Pots.